Hello, friends. My name is Jason Imms. I'm the Director of Quality Assurance for Mighty Kingdom. For those of you that haven't heard of Mighty Kingdom, we're Australia's largest independent game studio. We're currently at about 130 staff and still growing. We recently joined the very small community of Australian games companies that are listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. And we've been around for about 10 years now, and we're super duper excited for this next phase of the studio's life. Today, we're going to have a bit of a chat about quality assurance and how to apply it into different phases of your project life cycles, which I think will be fun because most people do it at the end. And I'm here to tell you that that is not the way we like to handle it. It's not the best way for you. And now you get to learn why. So I was writing a bio for something recently and realized that I've been working in software QA for more than 2 decades, which basically makes me a dusty old skeleton. But at least it also means that I can talk to you with a bit of authority about what good QA practices look like and hopefully give you some insights into how to build good QA into the broader spectrum of project types and modes of work that you might be used to operating in. So I've worked in both games and enterprise software over those many years, which, just as a quick aside, is something that I'm actually really proud of. Making intranets and customer relationship management software isn't exactly as exciting or personally fulfilling as making games for me, but it is fantastic for learning best practices that have been developed in those more established and rigorous sectors, and for getting a feel of the types of challenges that those big players in software development tend to face. And that will help you as you start to grow your own studios and start to face those challenges yourselves. And let me tell you, having some enterprise software experience under your belt makes you very attractive to employers. So it's worth it, and you haven't failed. It's wonderful. Anyway, back to the quick history lesson so that I can establish this authority to speak on the subject. My pathway into games was admittedly a weird one. I started in QA in the way that many people tend to. I was studying at university, and a local IT firm was advertising for casual testers to join their team. It paid a lot more than my old job at Domino's Pizza, so I jumped at the chance. And from there, I moved between a handful of local IT companies, primarily bespoke software developers, servicing major clients like state government departments and large corporations. After working in enterprise QA for a good long while, I found myself with the opportunity to try my hand at tech and games journalism in a freelance capacity, which was another kind of annoying right place, right time story. So I won't waste your time with it in detail, but suffice to say, it boiled down to sending the right email to the right editor at just the right moment. I steadily increased my freelancing and decreased my QA hours until I was eventually working as a journalist full-time for a wide range of publications, including GameSpot, Giant Bomb, Tested. You can see some on the screen there, and quite a few more. Being a freelance journalist and writing about video games for a living and working with a bunch of people who I deeply, deeply respect was an absolute dream come true. But also, I have a mortgage and I have 5 kids. I was earning well enough, but the lack of stability was an absolute killer. The constant need to be pitching and landing stories, the travel, the fact that at any moment, a significant chunk of my income could just disappear in the space of one email. It was completely untenable. So it was time for a change. And as luck would have it, an opportunity was about to come my way to merge my games journalism career and all the network that I'd built through that with my software QA career. And that was the Machine QA. I was approached by some quite well-known Australian game studio owners who pitched the idea of us working together to set up a QA consultancy specifically to serve the Australian games sector. They themselves needed a bunch of QA work done and would be our first customers, and we could kind of grow our customer base from there. The Machine QA was my baby. We built it to help our clients confidently make their best games, and I think we really did that. And we eventually expanded our customer base overseas. It was an amazing ride, but it couldn't last. We worked on some titles that I am absolutely still to this day kind of pinching myself about. Some highlights were helping League of Geeks make its first move into mobile with our Mellow, and we established some great new procedures for their internal QA team. We also worked closely with New Zealand's own Love Shack Entertainment, as well as Horse Drawn Games, to bring the framed collection to the Switch. I even had the privilege of working with Clay Entertainment on Mark of the Ninja Remastered for Switch, alongside the excellent Plastic Fern Studios. I did a lot of consulting to a bunch of other studios as well on building QA processes that would serve them long into the future. And I had a huge amount of fun, and we did some awesome work, but it just couldn't last. There were a whole bunch of factors that contributed to us shutting down the machine, largely external circumstances that we just had no control over. 2018 was kind of not a great year, it turns out, for selling consulting services to game studios. But at the end of the day, we came to the conclusion that we just couldn't sustain the machine with the rate of work we were able to win from the Australian games industry in 2018. Game makers and studio owners all around the world hold what sometimes feels like an almost willful blindness to what it actually costs to make games for market. To be active, viable, vital members of an industry, not just a hobbyist sector that happens to make some money. Lowballing contractors, underpaying staff, underpaying themselves, taking the time to develop and improve their processes, proactively training and accrediting and strengthening their teams, especially emerging practitioners beyond what they learn from their job experience alone, or taking opportunities like this one to come to talks and learn as much as possible from the people around them. So I'm just extremely excited to be working at Mighty Kingdom now, a studio that cares about this stuff and gives us what we need to be able to do this stuff right. I mean, based on our current numbers, the QA team at MK is more than 10% of the studio, which is wild. Like that's huge. It's arguably the way it should be, but it's uncommon. So it's really deeply wonderful to be working for a studio that cares this much. So today we're going to be taking a look at some of the different forms of QA practice that we've implemented at Mighty Kingdom, and how we've applied them to different project states. But first, a glossary. So take a photo of this slide. We've only got 30 minutes together. So this is a slide of terms that I'm going to use during this talk, but will not take the time to define in detail. So get your cameras out or hit a screenshot if you're tuning in on the internet. And when I hit this button, you're going to have 5 seconds. So here we go. That didn't work. Now you've got 5 seconds. All right, functional testing, acceptance testing, agile development, source of truth documentation, and prescriptive test cases. I may use some other jargon that I failed to capture in the glossary. Send me a message or whatever, and I will do my best to define it. Give it a Google, but we'll go from here. All right, different modes of operation. There are a handful of different modes of operation for games projects based on a whole bunch of factors. These are some of the most common ones. I want to be really clear and state that this is not the games production lifecycle. These are not project states that every single project goes through, from pre-planning all the way through to post-release support. This is some kind of unruly, unholy amalgamation of project type and project state that describe how a QA team likes to think about how it engages with a project and how it delivers value. So to give you an example, a Greenfields project can be anything, and it's very much subject to change. It's often a new IP, and at that early stage, it's little more than a loose collection of ideas that may or may not coalesce at some stage into an actual product. From a QA standpoint, Greenfields projects are really risky because you know what they generally don't have? A whole bunch of finished features that are well documented and ready for test. Many people would say it's not worth testing on a project in that stage, but I want to show you that they're wrong. So it's a common refrain amongst QA practitioners to include QA early in your project planning and your project budgeting. But it can be really hard for studio owners to know what that means or how to make a business case for the expenditure over and above what they would normally expect to be spending on functional testing that starts much later in the project. But get your notepads out, because this is what you need to know. QA is incredibly more than just testing, and it's always better, it's always cheaper to avoid bugs than it is to fix them. A Greenfields project is a project that doesn't have a clear or detailed understanding of what it's going to be yet. Maybe you've delivered a pitch to a publisher and they love your concept, so they greenlight the development of a prototype. Or you've got some concept art and a few paragraphs in a pitch document. You have an ideas person who will talk your ear off if you let them, but everything's still very nebulous. Nothing's concrete. Your team's busy throwing ideas around, and they're being tasked, and they're planning, setting out wireframed levels and throwing in placeholder character rigs to see how things feel. They're developing underlying systems that support connections to external systems or to middleware, that kind of thing. But nothing about the project is done. So how can a QA person look at any given feature and claim that it's finished? Can you even file a bug against an unfinished feature? The long answer is yes, you can, but it's complicated. But in short, no, that would be stupid to try and file a bug against something that's not finished. But what QA can do is validate the completion of work as it makes its way through the project. So none of these features are finished, but the work has been broken down into achievable chunks. And you should be able to validate that each of those chunks are individually done, that are individually complete. An example of one example is a developer may have put together a new player movement system. It's very early, it's definitely not final, but done enough for the current sprint and to support prototyping of other associated features. QA's job then is to look at what that work entailed, what it added to the product, and confirm that what it does what it was supposed to do, that what was supposed to have been achieved has in fact been achieved. We're not hunting for bugs at this point. We're validating the team's effort toward achieving the goal for the sprint. We're helping them do their best work. So we're basically asking them to confirm that they've done what they said they would do. Sometimes this involves what we call feature handovers, where a larger or higher risk piece of work is completed. The developer assigned to it can be asked to hand it over to QA by doing a little demo of what they implemented. More often than not, during these little demos, the developers tend to notice issues that they hadn't quite finished yet. It gives them a chance to see every piece of work they do through someone else's eyes. That way, they're more likely to spot their own faults and inconsistencies that, if left as they are, could result in a much more catastrophic and harder to fix bug in the future. Back in my journalism days, incidentally, this was a really common thing that we do called reframing. You'd finish up a story, you do a quick pass over it to look for errors, you paste it into your email client or the CMS and send it off to your editor. And as soon as you hit that send button, you are guaranteed to spot a whole bunch of errors that you've just been looking through until now. The reason you can see them after you hit send is because you're looking at the article in a different context. You're almost seeing it through your editor's eyes all of a sudden. It could be that you're looking at it in your email client rather than looking at it in a Word document or whatever. So we'd reframe it by using a few different tricks. Some people would resize the Word viewport or change the font size to make the text line up differently and feel differently. Others would load it up on an iPad or some other device. Some would even print it out and go through it with a pen, like their English teachers used to do. But that process is really quite valuable because we can deal with these issues before they become bugs in the product. QA can also act as an independent voice, helping other members of the team consider what work they're doing and the decisions they're making simply by asking questions. This is the fluffiest part of the job. It's the hardest part to quantify, but I think it's really powerful. We ask questions like, have you thought about how this feature might interact with another feature? We might say things like, this feature could cause us problems when we try and go through certification if we continue with it as designed. We can ask, how many concurrent players should we expect this feature to safely support based on the current design? Questions help people get out of ruts in their thinking, and QA is well placed to have the higher level view of the project. It's not so down deep in the details, and see how those features might actually fit together. I firmly believe that people are much more likely to learn from their mistakes if they're given the opportunity to find them for themselves. We're reducing total defect load by heading them off at the pass and by making it less likely that similar mistakes will be made in the future. It's a double whammy. Prevention, much better than a cure. Okay, this one is a little more self-explanatory. The rubber has hit the road and we're well on our way to having a finished game. At this point, our goals are really clear. And what we're trying to make has been solidified, features are being completed and deployed into builds. Now we're moving into a more traditional enterprise grade QA structure of functional testing and acceptance testing. We're not only validating the completion of work, we're also bug hunting and comparing features in builds to the source of truth documentation that we have on hand, as well as looking at how features fit together to make a game that all our players want to play and that make our stakeholders happy. As features are completed and make their way through our work board and are marked as ready for QA, the QA team will throw a bunch of functional testing techniques at them in order to confirm that they are doing what they're supposed to do, they don't do what they shouldn't, and that they aren't too vulnerable for release into the wild. This is where the majority of our project bugs will be found. Functional testing deeply probes a feature with a view to finding and filing as many bugs as possible. It doesn't care so much how different features work together at this point. It's more about getting down into the nitty-gritty details of each individual feature in order to expose as many of the most severe bugs still hiding away in there as possible. During full production, we'll also perform acceptance testing at various points. When is somewhat project dependent, but the trigger is usually when a build needs to be sent elsewhere, whether it's a release to the public, to a closed beta or other early access community, or perhaps in advance of a milestone and a subsequent demo to your publisher or a publishing development partner. Somewhat counterintuitively, acceptance testing is not at all concerned with finding bugs. We'll probably still find some here and there, but that's not the goal of acceptance testing. It's designed to validate whether the product in its current state is fit for purpose. Unlike functional testing, acceptance testing doesn't deeply assess a feature. It does look at how features fit together and whether the product is still fit for its current intended purpose after the inclusion of its newly introduced features. How users of different types make their way through the product and interact with gameplay loops, that kind of thing. The combination of these two things is really super duper powerful. And you can see from the diagram that I've shared there how these two ideas, functional and acceptance testing, differ from one another. Functional testing is very siloed, looking at each feature independently and in great detail. And acceptance testing is more shallow. It doesn't look deeply at any one feature, but focuses on how users flow through the system and interact with different groups of features. Combination is super powerful and will leave very few bugs on the table for your launch and your pre-certification testing to come. What about when we're not shipping new features? So for an ongoing or live service game, QA's role can change quite significantly. How does one provide value to a project as a QA analyst if that project isn't shipping new features anymore? Many live service or ongoing content games become about shipping more content to players within existing feature frameworks and not adding new ones. So the game isn't really changing mechanically anymore, but we still need to ensure that we're meeting our quality goals. QA can work with art and narrative teams to help them validate the completion of their work, much in the same way as projects in that Greenfields mode that we covered before. For games with ongoing content drops, seasonal events, things like that, delivering content is an incredibly huge amount of labor, and labor comes with the opportunity to make mistakes. The creation of content is often a very linear process. Assets are started by one person or team and make their way through other people and other teams until they're finalized and ready to integrate into the product. Writers write scripts, narrative designers integrate those scripts with the narrative engine, artists create assets, animators and riggers do their insane magic, and eventually all of that content makes its way into the title. QA can work within these intra-sprint, almost waterfall processes to validate done to varying degrees of detail. Or we can wait until right at the end when the content is integrated and in a playable build. But all the lessons we've discussed earlier in this talk about when to start applying QA processes apply within these processes. Leaving QA to the end is more risky, so it's better to get QA staff involved earlier and speed that labor up over the life of the process and start validating done along the way rather than waiting till the end. I should note that QA on ongoing content games can be fairly grueling, so I highly recommend setting up good personnel rotation processes at your studio to move people in and out of content delivery projects to look after their mental health. Launch and CQA. So this is the part that wrinkles my brain. This is where many studios start the QA processes. They wait until the game is largely finished. Most of the features have been marked as done and integrated, and only then do they begin seeing what bugs are lying around. Can you see what's wrong with this approach? At this point, the game has undergone huge amounts of change. The features that were finished first have sat largely idle, while newer features have been laid on top. Bugs that were present since the early production stages, and I absolutely guarantee there were bugs in there, those bugs have been there the entire time, meaning people have been developing habits around looking straight through them and around them and going, oh yeah, that's not working yet, we know, we'll sort it out later. Has anyone filed a bug anywhere? No, but I'll remember it, or I've got it written in a notebook somewhere. What we should be doing at this point is finalizing any leftover functional and acceptance testing, doing some regression testing on our onboarding and our first-time user experiences, doing a final full product acceptance test, and then preparing for certification. Pre-certification testing, or CQA, Cert Quality Assurance, is the process of running all of the same certification tests that our platform holders will run when you submit your game to them. The three major console providers have quite comprehensive, very comprehensive prescriptive test cases that allow them to ensure that your title will meet their requirements for being made available to customers in their marketplaces. Those test cases are available to developers through each of the respective development portals and are kept well up to date. So you can run those test cases internally before you submit your game for certification and vastly increase the likelihood that you'll pass first try. There are endless stories about studios that get stuck in limbo, submitting over and over and over again for certification as they fix the bugs that have been found in the run before. Sometimes those fixes introduce new bugs that then fall out in the next round, and you can see how a studio's cash flow can be quite severely threatened by this kind of unexpected delay in your studio's access to revenue. So don't be one of those studios. Do your CQA in-house before you submit so that you can submit with confidence. And that's the purpose of any QA practice, is to give the decision makers in your studio confidence in the decisions they have to make. Incidentally, CQA is a really fantastic candidate for outsourcing because it's super specific pieces of labor that don't ask the people outside your studio to have heaps of pre-existing knowledge of the game or to perform subjective quality analyses or to do any kind of exploratory testing. You go test this in this extremely specific way as defined by the platform holders. So it's a good option for outsourcing. I highly recommend it. Let me know if you need recommendations. Okay, so your launch date is fast approaching, and before that, you need to submit to and hopefully pass certification. If you're only really starting to test in earnest at this point in your project's life cycle, what's going to happen to all the bugs that you find? They'll be logged so that people can start working on them now, when you're fast approaching your delivery milestones. How long will they take to fix? Depends. How long will it take to verify those fixes? Depends. How many can you fix between now and your hard final milestone? You have no idea. So by starting early and catching problems before they're committed to code, validating features as they're being added to the product, and developing excellent processes around how bugs are documented and managed to completion, when you get to this portion of the project, things are just much safer. You've mitigated an incredible amount of risk. If there's only one take home from this entire talk for you, I want it to be this. If your budget doesn't allow you to start your QA practices earlier than the end of your project, then you've inherently accepted to ship bugs to market or to delay your release. You're choosing that future for yourselves. It's a choice. Of course, we can't all be aware of our blind spots. Maybe you're hearing this for the first time. I understand. We don't have infinite money. I get it. That's why you've shown up to this talk. Sometimes you can only make the best choice you have within the current constraints that you're facing, and that's fine. QA is very used to working within some very tight constraints. All I'm asking is that now that you've got a head full of information about how to apply QA to your project earlier, or how you might, and you have a feel for the value that it brings, please work to build those expectations into your studios and into your budgets for all future processes. Please help to create career pathways within your studio for QA practitioners, not just a dead-end job where they do some testing at the end of a project and then get fired, or a job that they only bother taking to sidestep into other more interesting roles. Please work with your tertiary educators in your region to include this kind of reality-based QA education in their future course structures. I'm going to finish up with a quote. I'm not a big quotes guy, especially quotes originating from the military, but I really do love this one. Quality is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives, the cumulative experience of many masters of craftsmanship. Quality also marks the search for an ideal after necessity has been satisfied and mere usefulness achieved. Quality is never an accident. I'm Jason Imms. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm pretty close to time, so there's probably not much time for questions, but hopefully I've been answering them for you in the chat if we're doing this as a video. Otherwise, look me up on Twitter. Look me up on Twitter at Jason Imms, and I'll answer your questions to the best of my ability. But thanks, and have a great conference.